Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. I just beat it. I just want to talk about it. What was the game that I really was looking forward to for such a long time, ever since it got announced. There were some very good things about this game, but at the same time, there were incredibly bad things. Not so much with the story, not so much with the performance. Everything that's visual is on par to be one of the best Hyrule Warriors games out of all of them. But let's start out first with the things that I did like about this game. The performance was bar to none. I kind of been a little jaded when it comes to Warriors games, just having played Age of Calamity, having played Hyrule Warriors, and just having played the Switch version of a very technical and performance heavy games on the Switch. Again, Switch's technology is outdated at this point. Even now, the Switch 2, yes, it's a huge upgrade to the Switch 1, but still, in terms of generation and technology leaps and what I know, technology is capable of nowadays, it is a little outdated. Let's be fully honest and transparent here. So right off the bat, the performance just really did surprise me. It's a consistent 60 FPS for the most part. There are some dips here and there, especially when there's so much going on the screen. But even then, a lot of the dips and just in general, the performance is great. It's very stable, good enough to look at, and I thoroughly enjoyed the gameplay through and through. I never felt like I was lost because of any sort of issues with lagging, any sort of issues with stuttering, any sort of issues with drop frames or whatnot. No, this game is fully optimized to be played on the Switch 2, and for the most part, it performed really, really well. The music is another thing that, again, as I previously said in a lot of my reviews, especially for Nintendo games, Nintendo is a production house. It's a composer. It's a house full of great composers, music composers, that kind of doubles as a video game company. Like, there's not a single first party title published by Nintendo where I say, yo, the music sucks in this, or the music is too boring, it's too generic. No, every single Nintendo game I've ever played to this point has had an amazing soundtrack, and Age of Imprisonment is, again, living up to those expectations. The main theme, the battle themes, even some of the themes when you're battling some of the bosses, even though they take a lot of elements from Tears of the Kingdom, obviously the soundtrack for that game, because it is, essentially a prequel to that game, and also a prequel to Breath of the Wild in a way. They're still, it's catered, and it's recomposed and recontextualized for a Warriors game. There are a wide variety of characters and different ways to play, but I'll have more to talk about that on the negative sides of this game, because even though there was a variety of characters, sometimes less is more, and sometimes more defined characters and their abilities would have been a more welcome approach rather than what they actually did. There are new characters. Obviously, this is a Legend of Zelda prequel, Tears of the Kingdom prequel, so there are new characters and people that we didn't really get to see in Zelda's memories, but still there is a welcome collection of characters that you're able to play, even though, again, I'll have more to speak on that. I will say that a lot of the new characters are charismatic and endearing, and I do love how much they expanded on the sages' stories, personalities, ambitions, etc., etc. Again, this is a Legend of Zelda game. The arc development can only go so far if you're not Zelda or Link or straight up Ganondorf. You're just support characters for the most part, but at the same time, that lack of, I want to say, character development for the side characters was still kind of like, even the little bit of development that we did get for these characters, it still felt enough, because we didn't get to see a lot. We didn't even get to see the faces of all of these sages in Tears of the Kingdom from Zelda's memories, which kind of leads me to believe that Age of Imprisonment was developed, at least their development cycles probably overlap with Tears of the Kingdom, and that decision not to show the faces of the sages or even expand more on them on Tears of the Kingdom was a conscious decision by Nintendo and by Koei Tecmo, you know, because they wanted kind of like a hook for people to play Age of Imprisonment, which again, I'm glad. It's a great way of storytelling. It's a great way to show more of these characters and you know, talk about their ambitions and whatnot. But yeah, still, it was very, very exciting to learn more about such ancient characters. Just very, very exciting. Voice acting for the most part is great, although I will say that some of the writing is a little bit corny. Calamo, for example, a new character, very charismatic, very endearing, but the writing is very cliche and it's a little corny. Like, he sounds like someone, like a theater kid wrote this dude. Like, he's like a kind of like a East Coast type of, I really couldn't pinpoint where exactly or how they were writing him, but he sounded like a very like, hey, you know, hey, what's going on, schmuck, you know, like very old school 70s, what they consider cool type of talking, you know, kind of like a no nonsense type of character, but he still was very corny at times and very cheesy at times. But again, I understand. This is Zelda. This is a mainline Nintendo game, a mainline franchise, Nintendo franchise. So they were trying to keep it as PG as possible and as straightforward as possible. There's only so many times or so many ways you can tell a princess in peril story without falling into those theater kid stereotypes in a way. The story, although I will say that a lot of the additions to the story of Tears of the Kingdom from this game, from Age of Imprisonment, are very welcome. My biggest issue with Age of Calamity was that Nintendo didn't fully adopt or fully cared to even take into consideration just how much work went into Age of Calamity, that they didn't even consider it canon. Because again, I think they're just cowards. They just didn't want to upset people. They didn't want to stir things up, especially with the timeline. They're kind of like catching up to their own tail when it comes to the Zelda franchise. Like, I feel they never meant for Zelda to have a concise story or a timeline, but because of the pressure of the fans, Nintendo kind of like had to haphazardly put together a timeline. So now they're very wary of making games that are not part of the actual timeline. And my biggest issue with Age of Calamity was that Nintendo didn't accept that game as canon, when again, in my opinion, the story was amazing on Age of Calamity. You got time traveling, of course, you got like split timelines and whatnot, but still the characters and the development and just the storytelling in that game was good enough. You know, it still was captivating enough. In a way, it was more fulfilling to go through that story and its paces than Breath of the Wild for the most part, because Breath of the Wild, you're just reliving memories, much like Tears of the Kingdom. You're just reliving things that happened in the past and trying to piece everything together, and like, you not being part of the story and you not affecting the story and the outcome of the game in real time kind of does take away a lot from the story elements and the story punchlines that I really did wish that Nintendo would have been more welcoming and been more accepting of Age of Calamity as an actual piece of canon, an actual piece of Legend of Zelda history. But again, it is what it is. With Age of Imprisonment, the story still added so much to a game that you already beat in Tears of the Kingdom. It gave you kind of a look to an ancient Hyrule, but this is where my issues started to, you know, rear their ugly head in. Even though I really enjoy the story, it still felt a little flat. There weren't that many twists and turns. We essentially just relived everything that we saw through the dragon tears in Tears of the Kingdom. It's just a retelling of the same story. Yeah, you got some, you know, some twists and turns here and there. For example, with the introduction of Calamo and the mysterious construct. I'm gonna try and not be very spoilery, but by the end of the game, there is sort of a payoff when it comes to these two new characters, because they weren't included at all in the retelling of the story, the ancient story of Hyrule in Tears of the Kingdom. So they kind of played that off well, but there are other things where they just kind of felt like, oh, it's just Breath of the Wild but repeated again. You know, it's just the same story of trying to get, a king or a central figure, the hero, going out and convincing people from other races to come and help them defeat evil. And then that's essentially how the story plays out. And then you're like left with, oh, that's it? Like, there's no twist. Like, it's Zelda. They have to hit the same beats over and over again. But as someone who's getting older and somebody who grew up with the Legend of Zelda stories, I get bored after a while, just like good versus evil. Good overcomes evil at the last minute through the power of spirit, through the power of courage, through the power of friendship and whatnot. And I'm like, oh my god, again. I will say, if up to this point, if you haven't beaten Tears of the Kingdom, the death of Queen Sonia was a welcome kind of twist to something that is not very common in Legend of Zelda stories. Actually seeing characters die off on screen, welcome. That is a very welcome kind of like, oh, this is an adult story, not so much just another kid's game. I like that. But I really do miss the time of actual twists or actual just variances in story. Something that is just not as simple as good versus evil. Something, for example, as Majora's Mask. I'm a cliche. I love Majora's Mask. I'm always going to compare every single Zelda game, especially the story, because technically, like, that game's already outdated. But the story of Majora's Mask, to me, is great writing. Because the evil isn't necessarily just evil in that game, Skull Kid is just a completely misunderstood kid. He's very lonely. He's trying to make friends. He's trying to force friends. And it kind of really teaches you a story of empathy, a story of anger, a story of solitude, and a story of abandonment, rather than just like, oh yeah, this person's just evil and they just want to take over the world. Tears of the Kingdom, Age of Imprisonment is just essentially more of that same story, good versus evil. And again, I think I'm just getting old, where I'm just like, yeah, these stories are no longer for me. They're too simple. They're too straightforward. Age of Imprisonment is much of the same. Good versus evil, where you recruit friends, you banish evil, and that's it, Just a retelling of things that we've been told for almost 10 years at this point, ever since Breath of the Wild. It's been 8 years since Breath of the Wild came out. So it's like, again, with this story, that's just what I felt at the end of the day. The story is still good because it expanded on a lot of things, but it's still more of the same. So that's my main issue with this story. In terms of gameplay, it does get very repetitive very quickly. The gameplay loop boils down to essentially, clear this camp and go to the next camp. Kill this enemy, kill the next enemy. Oh, another enemy showed up. Kill them. And there it is. You passed the mission. You did it. In previous Hyrule Warriors games, you actually had to defend camps. Camps would sometimes fall to enemies that would invade, and you would have to kind of backtrack a little bit or send another character to like defend that area. And you can't beat this mission unless you capture all of them at the same time. The stakes were a lot higher in even Age of Calamity. This game is just entirely too linear. It is just painfully linear. It gets to a point where like a lot of these missions were just slog fests. It was just very boring. The minions, the base enemies just were very inconsequential. If you just focused all your attention to the main boss or the main mini boss of that camp, the enemies around you wouldn't even attack you. They would just surround you, but that's it. They wouldn't attack. They wouldn't interrupt your attacks. They just were inconsequential. They were just there. They were just fodder. They were just background characters. They were just extras, to you fighting the main enemy. It was very easy to get through this game, but it wasn't easy not even enjoyable. It was just a slog fest. It was just kill this enemy, go to the next enemy, kill this other enemy. There it is. Enemies were just there. Minions were just there. Nothing of consequence, nothing of challenge came from them. And it just kind of made them get in the way. Like they were just taking processing power away from the console. That it was just like, okay. It just felt like a tech demo that Nintendo put together to be like, hey, look how many enemies we can put on your screen now without the console slogging, without the console dropping frames, without the game struggling to keep up. Make them do something. Make them attack me. Make it more challenging. give them the tools enough to make even minions base level enemies challenging. They were inconsequential for the most part. Upgrades were okay, but nothing exciting. Any of the upgrades you got for your weapons, you know, every time you beat a mission, you would get Zonite Steel that you can use to upgrade your weapons. They just didn't feel like actual upgrades, because again, everything was very easy. The enemies were very easy. They had extremely readable heavy attacks. You could dodge everything for the most part. You can interrupt the heavy attacks for the most part because the camera would slow down. It would give you a slow-mo chance for you to attack that or interrupt that heavy attack, that it kind of felt unnecessary. Like it just turned every single battle into it turned every enemy into a sponge. You know, that was the challenge in of it itself. Just hitting these enemies for longer, but the patterns of attack were all the same. The game gave you so much leeway to interrupt the heavy attacks that in essence, I never got attacked. I didn't get a single heart of damage from an enemy heavy attack because I could easily dodge them or I could just interrupt them. Like, it was just so easily avoidable. And again, I've seen people say that, yeah, ultra hard is very, very hard in this game, but all they've ever made was the enemies feel like sponges. Like, the challenge in and of itself, yes, I can go into ultra hard more, but I always play my games in normal settings. Why? Because that's the base level. That's what the developers wanted the average person to experience. So a lot of my reviews are always going to be based off of that, especially with a game like Hyrule Warriors, because yeah, the difficulty spectrum can change. You know, a lot of the changes can be like, oh, you do less damage, enemies do bigger damage, but in essence, that's not the base game. That's not the average game experience. So that's what I'm basing every criticism off of. There's no actual stakes, like I said, at defending the bases. The missions were extremely linear, very easy. You kind of just have to defeat on average 2 or 3 big enemies or capture 2 or 3 camps, and that was it. But none of these camps would ever fall. None of these enemies would do enough damage for you to really feel like a threat, or there was no actual challenge. And it just made the game very linear, very boring, and more of a slog fest. I just cannot wait to beat this game by hour 15. I was like, okay, I think I'm just gonna focus on the main missions because all of these side missions are inconsequential. You just go through the same thing over and over again. The hardest enemies you would ever fight were Lionels, and that was it. It was just boring. I just did not really enjoy any of the side missions to this game. And again, the stakes weren't as high, mainly because the story. The story in Age of Calamity, you got to fight at Fort Hateno. You got to fight at Akala Citadel. Like, these big, epic battles that you heard throughout Breath of the Wild, you finally got to experience them. But the main attraction to the story of Age of Imprisonment is the imprisoning war. I feel that Tears of the Kingdom, because of its scope being smaller, story-wise, to Breath of the Wild, I feel that they were building up off of something that was already very broken down to its very basic fundamental elements in terms of story-wise. We all know that Tears of the Kingdom started out as DLC for Breath of the Wild. Now, building a whole game based off of DLC is already a challenge within itself. You're already building a story out of less elements, out of less liberty to tell a story. Now, building off of that DLC, quote unquote, you're already building off a very basic skeletal story, or a very fundamental story that you're like, oh, there's not much that can be told right here. Like, we've already done everything. We've already done all these twists and turns. We already kind of laid out the ending, that there wasn't anything you could look forward to. There was no Akala Citadel takeover. There was no Fort Hateno fight. There was no grandiose battle except the imprisoning war. And at that point, it's only you against Ganondorf in a small chamber. There's no big army. There's no stakes. You already know what the ending is going to be. So it's just like, okay, there's no twist. It just You're just playing out the same thing that you already saw through Tears of the Kingdom. In terms of story, it felt like DLC story of a DLC story. You know, I really hope I'm making sense right there. Like, you took a full story, took half of it, and then you made Tears of the Kingdom out of that half. And then you took Age of Imprisonment and you took half of that half, which is what? Now you're building off a quarter of a whole world. You know, it just felt very small, very inconsequential, very blah. And that's very disappointing because I really did enjoy Age of Calamity. I really did enjoy Hyrule Warriors. I became a big fan of Musou fighters because of Age of Calamity. I played throughout the years. I played on PSP, Dynasty Warriors. I played obviously Hyrule Warriors, the first one on the Wii U, and then Age of Calamity is the one that really captivated me enough to really pour a lot of time and attention into the Musou games. But this game left me wanting more, and it just left me wishing for more. That it hurts me to say that I found Age of Imprisonment as a very disappointing slogfest of a retelling of a story that I already knew what the outcome was. It just felt very boring. I'm sorry. It's just disappointment. That's all it is. I can't really be any more harsh or critical of this game. All in all, I really did enjoy my time with the wild era of Legend of Zelda. It's been 8 years almost of this world. No, it has been 8 years. It has been 8 years of this same world, and I really do look forward to the future of Legend of Zelda. I think this is not the best way to close out this chapter of the Legend of Zelda franchise, but I think it's time we move forward. I feel that we've lived in this Breath of the Wild era of Hyrule long enough that I'm ready for the next step. I'm ready for a shakeup in the storytelling. I'm ready ready for a shakeup in the gameplay. I'm ready for a shakeup in general when it comes to the Legend of Zelda. I feel most fans have grown up with Legend of Zelda. That, you know, most people that probably grew up with Legend of Zelda are my age, you know, mid-30s, almost to their 40s. That I feel that the series, if they want to keep up with its main audience, its core audience, they do have to grow with that audience. Video games are very unique in that way, where it's a type of media that is never ending. You can keep making games for a franchise using the same characters and the same story elements for very long. I mean, Legend of Zelda has been with us for what, 35 years? That if you don't evolve and you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you might end up in a stale. You might end up at a plateau, no pun intended, which isn't a very great plateau, no pun intended times two. So I'm very excited for the future of Zelda. I'm very excited to see what Nintendo does with the future of Zelda and see how it switches things up, because I do think that they have to do something different in order to captivate new audiences, and especially older audiences such as myself, to continue growing with the series, because I still love this series. It is my favorite series of all time. It is my favorite video game series of all time, and I will continue being a fan. But again, Age of Imprisonment was a disappointment. Side characters were very generic in comparison to Age of Calamity. Gameplay loops were very boring, inconsequential, linear, repetitive. That again, the only good things about this game, in my opinion, was the music for the most part. And that sucks to say. But folks, you let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Age of Imprisonment. Did you like it more over Age of Calamity? Did you think it was a good addition to the Legend of Zelda series? Or did you think it added way more to the story than, you know, you were expecting? Any and all comments, leave them down below, because I really do want to hear about your thoughts on Age of Imprisonment. But folks, I've been True Fernie. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs down, because believe it or not, every single bit helps. Links to my socials are down below. Please make sure to follow me on Blue Sky, where I spend most of my waking hours talking about gaming, talking about sports, talking about anime, talking about anything and everything that might interest you as my viewer. But folks, please take care of one another, but most importantly, take care of yourself. Don't imprison yourself in negative thoughts. Peace.